On this one, I wanted to go into the world within worlds and try to go as far as I can with the idea of my perception of the world and how in many occult or spiritual texts it kind of says this, but like in a very indirect way, and you have to accumulate experience in order to test what I'm saying. But hopefully, what I'm saying, you could understand the mental concepts of it and then explore it yourself to see if it's true or not. And in other recordings, I used terms like the emotional body, mental body, spiritual body, physical body, solar body. But I kind of want to go into that because like how the diagram is that it's represented in circles, and those circles are spheres, and those spheres are worlds. And the reason why I put it into worlds like that is because the worlds is a easy representation to relay the information back to you. Say that again, like when you think of the world, you think of people in the world. People in the world have experiences within the world. Well, in your emotional body, it has its own world, so it has its own experiences. And if you could just kind of like reach for a little bit and say your emotional body has an ego, right? That ego attached to the emotional body is the awareness of the emotions itself and how the emotions move with other emotions, right? So like if you put that into like the mental body is its own world, has its own experiences, and it interacts with its world on its own. And then the spiritual and the other bodies. Like I wanted to like specify that these individual worlds are only individual in the concepts of intellectualism, because intellectualism breaks things down into different pieces so we can understand them and what they are and what they're representing and the principles behind them. But you're supposed to put it back together as a whole. So the physical, the emotional, and the mental are all one body, but they're in these different frequencies. And some people call them planes, some people call them dimensions. But like when you go into dimensions, it's one thing, it's something completely different just because of our understandings of what dimensions are. But think of the human body as one body, right? So on the third dimensional plane, right, and that's the starting point. We're talking about the third dimension. On the third dimensional plane, that's one dimension. Within that dimension, there's multiple frequencies. There's an infinite amount of frequencies within that dimension, right? So that dimension, the frequencies collide and make the matter that make us have form as humans. And that frequency, a certain frequency needs to be held in order to keep the human body intact in all its functions. But that frequency is the physical frequency. So it's the physical frequency for everything in the third dimensional physical universe, right? And this is the physicality of the third dimension, not any other physicality. So when all those frequencies collide, it makes the form, which in this instance we're going to say is the human body. Well, the human body is made up of multiple frequencies interacting with each other. So one frequency is the physical frequency. Then you have an emotional frequency. Then you have a mental frequency. Then you have a spiritual frequency. The physical frequency is what we use to interact within this world. The emotional frequency is how we're feeling with the experiences that we're dealing with in this world. The mental frequency is how we're perceiving things within this physical world. Then the spiritual aspect, the spiritual frequency is the detachment of self, the detachment of self to be aware of things greater than self, or basically like separating yourself from the expectations of your mental and emotional and physical, and think of it as a whole totality of an experience. Now, within the third dimension, all these frequencies exist, and there's an infinite amount of them because it all goes into degrees of either emotions of how we're feeling, degrees into thoughts of like what our mind is catching in the ether, and then the spirituality part of it, which is how we interact with our faith. Now, I usually use spheres and worlds because it's easy to understand, but combining them all, physical, emotional, mental, putting them all into one sphere, one world, they're all interacting with each other. Now, one isn't greater than the other per se, but there is somewhat of a hierarchy in understanding because this is an intellectual pursuit, but it's not an intellectual. Okay, how do I say it? We're intellectualizing it in order to understand it, but it's not an intellectual pursuit. It's a pursuit of being. And a pursuit of being is past the body, it's past the emotions, it's past the mind. So when you put all those three worlds together and you have multiple frequencies within that one dimension that make up the human body and consciousness and awareness of the experience, sometimes we keep the hierarchy fixed and not have it malleable to the situations that we're in. For instance, if we're in a work environment, we don't want to have the hierarchy of our emotions supersede everything else. If we're with family life, we don't want to have our mental be the hierarchy, be the highest in the hierarchy. We want a malleable interchanging of frequencies at our will, rather than having external forces play upon us that dictate how we interact with the world around us. You see what I'm saying? One is being able to control yourself, and the other is being controlled by outside sources. So a proper way to better understand it intellectually, to take it further and to experiment with yourself, is to understand the human body, right? So the human body in itself is a study that will last a lifetime. We're going to kind of skip through like the anatomy of the physical body and try to get into the anatomy of the denser, more etheric bodies, or like the concepts that drive the physical body. So the emotional body, which is its own frequency, is not necessarily above or below the mental plane, because like we said, it just depends on what you're doing and how you're living life and your experiences. But the emotions can be very tumultuous. They could be very positive or negative on your life, depending on your experience as well. So when I say the emotions are subservient to the mind, I'm not saying that in order to be a true human, you have to subvert your emotions for mentality instead. It's really like a slippery slope. But what I'm trying to say or point out is that when your mind is able to control your emotions, then you're able to experience your emotions in a more pure state, because the mind is going to filter out the reasonings and process behind your emotions, or that force that's coming upon you, or that's coming from within inside of you, and it's going to direct it and channel it a certain way. And without the mind's strictness with that, your emotions could come up and dictate your life in negative or positive ways, but you will have no control over it. So the emotional frequency is like the emotions being in a sphere or an aura, right, around your body, right? And that will be like the first shell of the human body without the physical body. It'll be your emotional body. And then on the outside of that, in the aura that encompasses the emotional body, it will be the mental body. So like it's kind of like watching Dragon Ball Z, right? At first, when they're powering up, it's a white aura around them. right? It's their base level's power to the maximum. Then eventually they get to higher degrees. So the next degree would be for Goku would be Kaioken, which turns red. Now he's turned that white aura into a red aura, right? So the white aura is his base level max power. So the red aura is the base level's max power amplified. And then eventually he gets to the point where he turns Super Saiyan and he turns gold. And each Super Saiyan stage, the aura intensifies and electrifies. It's the same way with the human body, with our understandings of it so far, based on like occult experience and religious practices and faiths. The mental body holds the emotional body, but it's not like the mental body is a bubble around your body, then the emotional body is a bubble inside that bubble. They're both interchangeable with each other. It's like there's no borders between the two. There's only the frequency of the emotions and then the frequency of the mind. So when I say the mental body holds the emotional body, what I'm saying is the mental body at the highest level that we can conceive is in control of the emotions, and the emotions are subservient to the mind instead of the emotions running running the mind, telling it what to do and how to feel and all these other things. So with the mental body holding, or the mental body being in control of the emotions in a very non-patriarchal way. I know that sounds crazy. It's so hard explaining this with all the PC culture that we have, but I'm trying to use like basic terms that are universal, but I guess the universal structure of words are changing in the 21st century, beginning of the 21st century. But then we have like the spiritual body, and the spiritual body holds the mental body and the emotional body. But like I said before, there's no boundaries between it. It's not like there's a circle within a circle within a circle. It's not like that. It's a frequency that holds a frequency that holds a frequency. It's frequencies within frequencies, right? And all these frequencies are interchangeable. Now, when we get to a certain level within our spirituality, we'll start recognizing these forces. And these forces come from certain places in our bodies, right? Because that's how they first manifest. Because most of us are physical beings. Like, most of us don't understand the mentality of the universe. So we're physical beings first, within our minds, within our experience. We're physical beings. So the ancient Easterners have developed systems revolving around the body and how forces come from the body, which is true, but it's not the totality of spirituality. It's a stepping stone, just like any spiritual text is. It's a stepping stone to understanding greater truths of forces. So your emotions often comes from like your stomach or like your midsection, because when you have really exciting feelings, it feels like they're bubbling up, and they spring from your midsection up, right? Or when you have negative feelings or worries, you feel that same energy, but it feels like in your midsection is going down, right? So that's like the kind of like the center of the understanding of feeling of the force. But that's not what where the force actually is. The force actually is all around us. It's going through our body, but our bodies are receptors. So we're receiving the frequencies around us through this human body like an antenna, and we're holding on to it. And that's where we hold on to our feelings. I think I want to say Chinese, what's it called? I won't say Tao, but there's a Tai Chi. There we go, Tai Chi. And Tai Chi is the Tantien, which is like where like pretty much where the belly button is, and it's like a center of force where you collect energy. And in that area is kind of where I'm talking about, to give like a like a visual. So when we're thinking, you most of the time when we're thinking with our mind, right? With our head, with our brain. But that's not actually where we're thinking. We're actually thinking within the space around us that we can perceive. But it's not the space in the third dimensional that I'm talking about. It's the space within the third dimensional frequency of the mind. So you have the frequency of your emotions, which are still on the third dimensional plane because we're third dimensional physical beings. It's still there, right? But now we're tapping into a frequency in into the mental realm. So that let's just say the third dimensional is physical, right? And the fourth dimensional is mental, which is true and not true, but that's another conversation. So we're tapping into our physical frequency, which is our bodies, and then we're also tapping into the fourth dimension, which is the mind. But instead of separating it through dimensions, we're still in the third dimension. We haven't left the third dimension. So it's not accurate to say that we're third dimensional beings on the fourth dimensional plane. That's not accurate because in order for that to be accurate, we'll have to have dual consciousness. Because on the fourth dimension, you have a body there too. You know what I'm saying? And to say that you're in the third dimensional and fourth dimension would mean you would have to have split consciousness. Which I mean, I'm assuming like adepts and masters do have split consciousness, and they can operate in the third and fourth dimension at the same time. But most of us cannot. And in a little bit, I'll explain why with dreams. So we're third dimensional beings tapping into an emotional frequency, and then we're tapping into a mental frequency. Both of those frequencies are on different wavelengths, but they intersect with each other. They're from the same substance. The frequency itself is the substance, but they're just different parts of the substance. Just like you have the ocean water, then you have the foam. They're the same substance, but one has changed form based on the conditions, and the other is in another form based on its conditions. So the conditions of your emotions could change into conditions of the mind, whether through our natural experiences of how we process things, or through actualization of our minds and thinking process, which is a form of alchemy. So when we get to a point of understanding that the three worlds, the physical, emotional, and mental, are one body. Within that body, there are multiple frequencies that are all on different wavelengths, but they're also one within all the same thing. They're just they're deviating a little bit to over here, a little bit over there, where it separates them from thinking or feelings. So thinking and feeling is the same thing, but it's just on different spectrums. So when we understand that intellectually, then we could look back to ourselves and say, okay, look, I'm feeling this way. So the act of me saying that I am feeling this way means that I'm tapping into the emotional frequency and the mental frequency, and I'm relaying the two, right? So I'm saying that this is the water and this is the foam, and I understand that. That allows you to dissect how you're feeling. So dissect the lower forces that you're feeling into higher forces. And once you're able to see the root cause with a lot of honesty and truthfulness with yourself, then you're able to see, okay, I'm feeling this way because this happened, right? Then you can go within your mind into the fourth dimensional, or the mental frequencies, and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling because of this way. Now, this is a negative feeling that is not doing me any good, and I realize that. So every time that comes up, I have to remember that that's not doing me any good, and I don't need to worry myself about it. And eventually, you'll build up a muscle to gently exercise it away. Now, looking at everything as one is a trick. Is a trick on your mind, because in our minds right now, Like society has us so logical that we forget about the creative abstract part of ourselves. So when I say everything is one, in totality, everyone understands that. Most spiritual people understand everything's one, but to intellectualize that and to say everything is one, but everything is also infinite, infinite of infinitely many things, and that infinite many things is also the same thing as one. And not a lot of people understand that concept because we're not able to understand ourselves and our multi-frequency self to realize that yes, these frequencies and these frequencies are all coming from the same place. So once you start understanding the mentality frequency and then emotional frequency, then you have your spiritual frequency, which is the highest frequency that we're holding, and we're trying to get to a point where we move our ego from our emotions to our mind to our spirit, and have that spirit reign over our mind, and have that mind reign over the emotions. That way, we are no longer stuck into the lower worlds of the emotions, where we're stuck into a repetitive uh, a repetitive form of desire, and we can rise to the plane of thoughts. So then we can get our ego within our thoughts and combat the thoughts and realize what's good thoughts, what's bad thoughts, how to sift through thoughts, how to be invisible to other thoughts, how to orchestrate ourselves within the fourth dimension, within the mental frequency, then get to the spiritual, to the spiritual frequency, to where we're able to be separate from our minds and emotions, but still one with them, just like our emotions and our emotional frequency and mental frequencies are one and the same, but also separate. So once we hit that spiritual level within ourselves, then we understand, okay, all of this is one, and now I have a larger tool set to refine my ego, because ultimately that's what it's all about. It's refining the ego.